The Kremlin says it still needs time to process Donald Trump's statement that the United States could help close the skies over Ukraine as a part of a future security guarantees. Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov said the idea had not previously been discussed and would, in his words, mean NATO forces operating on Ukrainian territory. The statement appears to have caught Moscow off guard. For years, Russia had treated Western hesitation over air defense as a strategic advantage. Now even the possibility of a NATO-backed protection of Ukrainian airspace is being presented by the Kremlin as a threat to the very purpose of its war.
This is a new statement. There have been no such statements before. Previously, no one discussed the issue of closing the skies over Ukraine. In any case, this would mean that the armed forces of a NATO country would be operating on Ukrainian territory. This is precisely what the special military operation is being conducted against. That must be understood. So of course, this still needs to be carefully considered. We need to understand how thoroughly this issue has been worked out, who has discussed it with whom, and so on.
Kirill Dmitriev, Putin's special envoy for international economic cooperation, has described Great Britain in just 2 words: a fallen empire. That is quite a line coming from Moscow. Because if any country now looks like an empire in decline, it is Russia, burning through its wealth, its population, and its future in an attempt to occupy a neighbor it still cannot defeat. Psychologists call this projection, accusing others of the weakness you are increasingly unable to hide in yourself. So perhaps Dmitriev should keep the phrase. Russia may need it very soon. In broad daylight, Russia dropped 2 guided aerial bombs on a crowded civilian area in Sumy. This is a local coffee shop, and its CCTV cameras captured the exact moment the blast hit. People were sitting inside drinking coffee, and then the windows were blown in. Outside, people simply dropped to the ground and covered their heads. 5 people were killed, including a child. 30 others were injured. One of the bombs struck near a public transport stop, damaging buses, cars, and nearby residential buildings. Russia did not strike a military base. It did not strike a weapons depot. It struck people in a cafe, passengers waiting for public transport, families walking through the city in the middle of the day. The cameras recorded what Russian officials' statements always try to erase, that the target was civilian life itself. And while rescue workers were still clearing the aftermath in Sumy, Russia launched new strikes on civilians elsewhere in Ukraine. In Odessa, drones hit a bus depot, setting passenger buses on fire and injuring 4 people. Local authorities said a sanatorium was also damaged. Once again, there were no military targets.
The Russians have once again defeated entirely civilian targets. Ordinary passenger buses in Odessa, ordinary residential buildings in Zaporizhia, and an ordinary hospital in the Kharkiv region. Every day of Russia's war against life only proves that supporting Ukraine is the right thing to do from every perspective: military, political, and simply human. Everyone around the world can see this. They see that Ukraine needs more air defense, more protection for people's lives, and that Russia's leadership has lost its mind over this war, irrationally refusing to bring it to an end. But pressure on Russia must work. New sanctions against the aggressor, new support packages for Ukraine, and new initiatives such as our European anti-ballistic Freya project, all of this must deliver results.
As Russia runs short of gasoline, people are switching to bicycles, public transport, and in rural areas, even horses. The fuel crisis is deepening after a series of Ukrainian strikes on Russian oil refineries. Drivers are spending hours and in some regions days searching for petrol stations that still have fuel. The shortage is changing daily life. Some Russians are carpooling to work or taking their children to school while others are switching to buses and taxis, but taxi drivers are also working less, canceling longer journeys and raising fares. In rural areas, demand for working horses has surged. People are buying them instead of cars and using them for transport, haymaking and everyday farm work. The Kremlin, meanwhile, continues to deny that Russia is facing a systematic fuel shortage and blames panic buying and speculators.
Drivers across Russia are waiting for hours to fill up at gas stations, and in some regions for days. As fuel shortages worsen, people are driving through entire cities in search of open gas stations, spending the night in their cars and waiting for their chance to refuel. Tempers often flare, with scuffles breaking out among people waiting in line for gas. In Chita, drivers are reportedly waiting for up to 36 hours to buy fuel. Some run out of gas while waiting and are forced to push their cars. People are also reportedly selling their places in line for as much as 35,000 rubles. In some of Russia's rural regions, residents are buying horses instead of cars. Demand for working horses has surged, and the animals are being used for farm work, haymaking and everyday transport. At the same time, bicycle sales have risen sharply, with bicycles increasingly seen as an alternative to cars.
And the longer Russia's refineries remain out of service, the more expensive the war becomes, not only for the Russian military, but also for ordinary citizens who once believed it was happening somewhere far away. Moscow has spent the weekend looking up at the sky. Russian air defenses have been trying to repel a sustained wave of drones heading toward the capital since Friday. Moscow's mayor Sergei Sobyanin first said 3 more drones had been destroyed on their approach to the city, bringing the number intercepted near Moscow to 50. He later claimed that around 300 drones had flown toward the wider Moscow region in just 24 hours, with the most allegedly shot down at a greater distance. The drone threat also disrupted aviation. Restrictions were introduced at Vnukovo, while other Moscow airports were forced to handle arrivals and departures only with a special clearance.
The Defense Ministry's air defense forces destroyed 3 more UAVs flying toward Moscow. Emergency service specialists are working at the sites where the debris fell. Over the past 24 hours, around 300 UAVs were heading toward the Moscow region. Most of them were destroyed by air defense forces on the distant approaches to the capital. 45 drones were shot down as they approached Moscow.
The United States is standing by its demand that Turkey get rid of the Russian S-400 air defense system if Ankara wants to return to the F-35 program. Turkey was removed from the American fighter jet program after purchasing the S-400 systems from Russia. Washington also imposed sanctions on Turkey's defense procurement agency. U.S. officials have warned that Russian system could collect sensitive information about the F-35 and effectively allow Moscow to study one of America's most advanced fighter aircraft.
So you're standing by, but before the NATO summit, you said Turkey would have to scrap the Russian missile defense system before the F-35 fighter jets could be sold to Turkey. You're standing by that. That's going to happen. They're going to scrap the defense system if the F-35 sales are going to happen.
Jake, I think it's very clear what American law requires. And, you would expect that the United States of America doesn't want our most sophisticated fighter jet to be tested against Russia's air defense system. So that's, I think, a deal that can happen. I think it will happen. And, this is F-35s, even if Turkey was allowed back in the program and met all the conditions under law, that these planes would not.
Robots are no longer the future of war. They are already fighting in what may become a historic milestone in military robotics. Soldiers from Ukraine's 100th 23rd Territorial Defense Brigade remotely controlled an unmanned naval platform across the Black Sea, carrying a ground combat robot armed with a machine gun. The robotic vehicle was landed on the Russian-occupied Kinbur Spit and sent behind Russian lines without a single Ukrainian soldier setting foot on the shore. If replicated at scale, this could mark the beginning of a new era where unmanned sea, land and aerial systems operate together in a single combat mission. Europe is preparing to ban Russian gas, but first it appears to be buying as much of it as possible. Just months before the EU's ban on Russian LNG imports is due to take effect, European countries imported a record almost 10 million tons of liquefied natural gas from Russia's Yamal LNG project during the first half of the year, an 18% increase compared with the same period last year. France, Belgium, Spain were the biggest buyers, with Europe absorbing almost the project's entire output. According to estimates, these purchases may have brought Russia around 6 billion euros in revenue. Politically, Europe says it is ending its dependence on Russian energy. In practice, Russian LNG is still arriving at European ports in a record volumes. Russian and Chinese warships have spent several days rehearsing how to fight together in the Yellow Sea. Video released by Russia's defense ministry showed the two navies conducting joint drills, including live-fire exercises with their artillery and machine guns. The crews practiced repelling simulated attacks by aerial drones and unmanned surface vessels, weapons that have become increasingly important in modern naval warfare. They also carried out joint maneuvers, anti-submarine missions, attacks against enemy surface ships, and maritime rescue operations. The drills are another demonstration of the increasingly close military cooperation between Moscow and Beijing. Russian and Chinese forces are not simply appearing together. They are practicing coordination, combat operations, and a response to the kind of unmanned systems that have already transformed warfare at sea. Earlier, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov insisted that the exercises pose no threat to anyone in the region.
As for our joint exercises, they are not directed against anyone, nor against any single state in the region. Everyone should bear this in mind. On the contrary, cooperation between Russia and China in such an important and critical area is a very significant factor that contributes to predictability and security in the region.
Ukrainian allies have met in Paris to address one of the most urgent gaps in the country's defense, the shortage of systems capable of intercepting Russian ballistic missiles. Leaders of the coalition of the willing are discussing additional Patriot interceptors, Franco-Italian SAMP-T systems, and joint production of a cheaper anti-ballistic weapons for Ukraine. The talks also cover new sanctions on Russia, measures against its shadow fleet, and long-term military support for Kyiv.
Yes, we need to prepare the wars of the future, but let's make no mistake. Our capacity to fight these wars will depend on our credibility today. It is today's wars that we have to win. We need to hold strong on the Ukrainian front. We need to stand by our partners in the Middle East. We need to have the capabilities to be partners in Africa.
That's all for now. Thank you for watching.